I thought this condemned seal room was empty until the iron tray shifted.
No room, no family tools, no promise of supper, just a blue wax chip and $2 she had saved from addressing envelopes after school. And with that money, she bought a forgotten wax seal ribbon pressing room outside Tacony, Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, where tax maps stopped naming it in 1967. Rain had opened a black seam in the roof. The rear chimney leaned 3 inches toward the alley. The county condemned it on October 18, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. Behind the iron seal tray waited a ribbon clamp untouched for 56 years, holding bank certificates and a ledger that would return her father's hidden life to her. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Cora Lane had been pressing other people's hopes closed her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she'd learned that paper changed character beneath patient hands. A school notice felt stern until folded square. A charity appeal became almost tender when its ribbon lay flat. Her father let her sort scraps by width at the kitchen table, where afternoon light made the wax chips glow like hard drops of jam. Her mother, Elaine, had once sung while washing dishes, but after a factory injury left her dependent on pain tablets and long silences, the singing stopped. Cora began measuring the household by unopened curtains, cold coffee, and the days her mother did not come downstairs. Her father, Thomas Lane, became both parent and teacher. Every Saturday, he carried a walnut case to the back room of St. Bartholomew's Parish School, where scholarship letters for apprentices, nursing students, and laid-off mill workers waited in careful stacks. He heated sealing wax over a low alcohol flame, turning the stick so it softened evenly rather than blistering. Cora centered narrow grosgrain ribbon beneath each fold, counted 3 breaths after the wax pooled, then lowered the brass press without twisting her wrist. While the emblem cooled, Thomas made tea in a dented kettle and read the recipient's name aloud, never the amount of money enclosed. By noon, the room smelled of beeswax, wool coats, and scorched dust from the radiator. A seal should keep a promise, not trap a secret, he told her once, after she pressed too hard and split a crimson edge. He meant the work had to remain honest, even when the letter itself belonged to someone else. Thomas died in Mercy Hospital on February 7, 2022, after a winter pneumonia turned swiftly against him. Before Cora could pack the walnut case, Denise Vale sold the brass dies, ribbon knives, melting spoons, and hand press to an estate buyer. Only one blue wax chip remained beneath a loose drawer liner. Denise was Elaine's older sister, a woman who lowered her voice when she wanted obedience. She wore pale gloves indoors and kept every receipt in labeled envelopes, including the grocery bills she later presented as proof of generosity. After the funeral, she moved into the front bedroom, changed the bank password, and answered questions by smoothing the tablecloth. She said there had never been ledgers, scholarship records, or private accounts. She said Thomas had enjoyed pretending his little work mattered. On March 14th, Denise placed Cora's winter coat over the banister and set a chipped porcelain robin beside it, the only object from her childhood bedroom she had not boxed for sale. Elaine sat at the dining table with both hands around an empty cup. A strip of sunlight crossed her knuckles. She did not look up when Denise opened the front door. "Take the coat. Leave the key on table." Cora waited for her mother to move. Elaine's thumb rubbed the cup's broken rim once, then stopped. That was the whole answer. Cora tucked the porcelain robin into one sleeve, put the wax chip in her pocket, and laid the key beside the sugar bowl. The door closed with the soft, well-fitted sound her father had once praised. For 6 weeks she moved north and east by the cheapest means available. In Camden, She slept 2 nights beneath the reading room awning of a closed historical society, her backpack looped around one ankle. In Trenton, she paid $12 for a church basement cot and woke to folding chairs clicking open for breakfast service. Newark cost more. A bus station locker took $4, and a paper cup of soup took $3. By the time she returned to Philadelphia, her savings had narrowed from $47 to $19, then $11, then $5. She slept in the women's waiting room at Suburban Station until security began checking tickets, then in a laundromat chair on Girard Avenue, while dryers rolled like distant weather. She washed her blouse in a sink, dried it beneath a hand blower, and kept the blue wax chip wrapped in a receipt so lint would not dull its surface. On the 43rd day, rain drove her into the Tacony branch library. She chose a table near the radiator and opened the classifieds, because newspapers could be held without anyone asking why. Between an advertisement for used pews and a notice selling 3 manual typewriters, a county line appeared in narrow print. Abandoned letter seal room, as is. Tax title, $2. Buyer removes hazard. She read it 4 times. The librarian, a silver-haired woman with a pencil tucked through her bun, brought over a county map without being asked. "It is walkable from the last bus," she said, tapping a road near the river. Not pleasant, but walkable. Cora spent $1 on the bus fare and kept the other 2 folded apart from her food money, though there was no food money left. At dusk, she returned to the station with the porcelain robin wrapped in her coat and the wax chip warm in her palm. By morning, she would be walking toward a room everyone else had priced as ruin. The bus left her at Frankfort Avenue before sunrise, beneath a shelter whose cracked plastic walls held the night's rain in wavering beads. Cora tightened the coat around the porcelain robin in her pack and followed Torresdale Avenue northeast, then turned toward the river, where the pavement thinned and warehouses gave way to scrub lots. She walked 11 miles that day, resting only when the strap cut deeply enough to numb her shoulder. By evening, the temperature had fallen to 34 degrees. She found a hay barn beyond the last row of houses, its sliding door chained but not fully closed, and eased through the gap sideways. The hay had gone gray at the edges and smelled of mice, dry earth, and summer stored too long. She slept between 2 bales, with her shoes beneath her head. Before dawn, a tractor started somewhere beyond the wall, and she left without being seen. The settlement beside the county road called itself Millbrook Landing, though no mill remained and the landing had silted into reeds. Its short commercial row held Kessler Hardware, Doris Bell's River Cafe, Parvin Pharmacy, Boyd's Funeral Chapel, and a narrow stationery shop, whose windows had been painted white from within. A barber turned his striped pole on as Cora passed. Across the street, Doris carried a chalkboard to the pavement and watched her without staring. The county clerk's office occupied the ground floor of an old brick schoolhouse. Inside, steam pipes ticked beneath high windows, and floor wax gave the corridor a medicinal shine. Cora found the property desk behind a half door marked Tax Title and Abatement. The woman seated there had one clouded eye and one sharply blue one. Her silver nameplate read, Mrs. Eleanor Voss. She examined Cora's newspaper clipping, then examined Cora with greater patience. "You understand the building has no approved water?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the wiring has been disconnected?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the roof may fail under snow?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand demolition can proceed if you miss inspection?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Voss folded her hands over the clipping. "And you have $2. Cora placed the bills on the counter. One was soft from repeated folding. The other still bore a purple laundry stamp near Washington's shoulder. The deed required 11 signatures and initials beside 3 warnings printed in red. Mrs. Voss turned each page exactly square before sliding it forward. When Cora finished, the clerk drew a brass stamp from beneath the desk, pressed it into a black pad, and brought it down with a weighty mechanical clap. "Walk east on Millbrook Road for 1 mile," she said. "Turn after the stone culvert. The lane has no sign. If you reach the marsh bridge, you have gone too far." Then she stopped with one hand resting on the deed. "Lane," she said. "Was Thomas Lane your father?" Cora did not answer at once. The room seemed to sharpen around the steam pipes. "Yes," Mrs. Voss leaned back. "He came here years ago asking about that room, not to buy it, to search the old business filings." "What business?" "Lane and Wren letter services, seals, ribbons, formal notices. Your father said his grandmother had worked there before it closed." She glanced toward the white hallway, then lowered her voice. "He returned 3 times. The last visit was perhaps 6 years ago. He wanted a ledger from the tax seizure inventory." "Did he find it?" "No." Mrs. Voss tapped the deed with one square fingernail. "The inventory said the room was empty except for fixtures. Your father did not believe it." Cora's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "He left this." Mrs. Voss opened the center drawer and removed a small card, browned at one corner. On it, in Thomas Lane's precise hand, was a property number and one sentence. "Check behind fixed pressing surfaces." Mrs. Voss did not offer the card. She copied the sentence onto the back of Cora's deed instead. "County records stay with the county," she said, "but handwriting can be repeated." Outside, the rain had stopped. Cora followed Millbrook Road between drainage ditches, glazed with weak morning light. At the stone culvert, an elderly man in green coveralls stood beside a mailbox, holding the collar of a black dog with a white muzzle. "You bought the seal room," he said. Cora nodded. The dog pulled once toward her, then sat. "Name's Walter Pike. Dog's Amos. He does not bite unless you are a groundhog." Walter released the collar. "Walnut Lane is yours. Mind the left tree. Drops limbs without warning." The lane ran between 6 black walnut trees, their branches bare and deliberate against the pale sky. Fallen shells cracked beneath Cora's shoes, staining the damp ground like old ink. The building appeared slowly beyond them, not hidden so much as withdrawn. It was a narrow brick structure, roughly 24 feet long and 14 feet wide, with fieldstone along the lower wall and weathered cedar shingles covering the rear addition. The roof sagged above the center beam. A single chimney rose crookedly from the west side, its upper courses separated by dark lines where mortar had washed out. Over the door hung a tin sign, barely readable beneath Rust Lane and Wren ribbon. Pressing letters, sealed daily. Cora put her hand against the door. The wood yielded before she turned the knob. Inside, cold air carried the mineral smell of wet plaster and the sweeter trace of old wax. Her shoe disturbed a skin of dust that lifted into the light, and she tasted grit at the back of her tongue. Somewhere in the wall, water clicked at measured intervals. She heard reeds moving outside, and beneath them, the tiny, dry skitter of something retreating under a cabinet. The front room had once received customers. A counter divided the floor, its walnut top scarred by coins and elbows. Faded ribbons remained pinned to a display board. Cream turned yellow, red thinned toward brown. When she touched one, it crumbled softly between her fingers. A framed price card hung crooked near the door, listing school certificates, morning letters, and institutional seals. The back room was colder. Its broken window had been covered with a square of roofing tin that breathed inward with each gust. Against the wall stood the pressing table, blackened by years of flame and wax. A cast-iron seal tray occupied its center. Behind it, almost concealed in shadow, Cora could make out the curved handle of a ribbon clamp fixed to the bench. She did not touch it. Her father had taught her that unknown pressure should be released slowly, with the work supported on both sides. The room was too dim, her hands too stiff, and the building still belonged more to the night than to her. She cleared a space in the front room with a broom whose straw had shortened to uneven teeth. From a cupboard she found 3 sheets of brittle packing paper and spread them beneath her coat. The porcelain robin rested near her head. She set the blue wax chip beside it, where the last daylight entering the window turned its edge translucent. Hunger tightened and then settled. The floor pressed cold through her clothes, carrying every shift of the building into her bones. The roof's low complaint, the walls' faint ticking, the tin over the window drawing breath. Before sleep, she unfolded the deed and traced the copied sentence in the weak light. Behind fixed pressing surfaces, in the back room, metal answered the wind with one small, patient sound. Some promises wait longer than the people who made them. On the first morning, Cora followed the sound of water through waist-high reeds and found the well 40 yards behind the building, capped with 2 warped boards and a stone heavy enough to discourage children. The rope had rotted, but the iron pump still held its handle. After 23 strokes, it coughed brown water, then cleared enough for washing. She boiled every cup before drinking. The outhouse leaned toward the creek behind a screen of sumac. Its door had no latch, so she tied it shut with a strip torn from her coat lining. By the 3rd day, she knew which floorboards complained and which ones only sighed. The loudest creak lay between the counter and the back room. She stepped over it at night. Kessler. Hardware smelled of rope, machine oil, and cedar shavings. Its owner, Samuel Kessler, had eyebrows so long they rested against the rims of his spectacles. He listened while Cora explained the deed, the failed chimney, and the money she no longer had. "You need heat before pride," he said. "I need both eventually." One eyebrow lifted. Samuel opened a ruled account book and wrote, "Cora Lane," beneath a row of farm names. 30 days. No interest. You pay when you can. I cannot promise 30 days. Then promise honest numbers. She did. He handed her a water-stained manual titled, "Repairs for the Smallholder." Published in 1948. Free, he said. Because nobody buys instructions after they learn everything badly. Cora left with a wire chimney brush for $3.40, 20 feet of jointed fiberglass rod for $2.10, a used claw hammer for $1.25, a tin of stove cement for 85 cents, and 6 feet of stovepipe at 60 cents per foot. Samuel added a pair of leather gloves without entering them in the account. The chimney came first. Cora spread damp burlap across the hearth opening, then tied the brush to the first rod, and climbed onto the low rear roof by way of an apple crate and the counter's broken shelf. The bricks shifted faintly beneath her knees. She fed the brush down one section at a time, turning clockwise so the rods would not unscrew inside the flue. The first pull brought only gray dust. The second released flakes of creosote that struck the burlap below like hard rain. By noon, black scales the size of fingernails had filled half a bucket. She worked the brush upward and down again, never forcing it past resistance, then loosened the lower blockage with a bent poker through the clean-out door. The work took 7 hours. Soot entered the seams of her gloves, the corners of her eyes, and the crease beneath her lower lip. At dusk, she checked the flue with a candle. The flame leaned steadily toward the opening. She sealed one cracked stovepipe joint with cement, waited until it skinned over, and laid a fire no larger than her 2 hands. Walnut twigs below, split kindling above, then one narrow piece of dry pine found beneath the counter. Smoke lifted cleanly. The first warmth arrived without ceremony. It touched the side of her face, then the wall, then the room behind her. She heated water in a dented enamel cup and softened half a heel of bread in it, with salt from a paper packet saved in Trenton. The meal tasted of smoke and metal. She ate slowly enough to feel full. Only after the chimney drew safely did she begin the workroom inventory. She opened the rear shutters and let pale light fall across the pressing bench. There were 7 objects worth keeping: a brass wax ladle with a walnut handle darkened by thumbs, 2 iron cooling plates, a ribbon gauge marked in 1/8 of an inch, a shallow drawer of hardened wax crumbs, a hand press missing its die, 3 bone folders tied with thread, and the cast iron tray fixed to the bench by 4 square-headed screws. The ribbon clamp remained behind it. At first she assumed the clamp had been mounted there because the wall side of the bench offered better leverage. Yet its handle could not open fully. The tray blocked its movement by nearly 2 inches. No careful worker would arrange tools that way. Cora tapped the bench with the handle of Samuel's hammer. Walnut answered with a dense, even knock until she reached the space beneath the tray. There the sound changed, not hollow, muffled. She pressed down on each corner. The tray's left side held firm. The right shifted less than the thickness of a coin. She removed the 4 screws. 3 turned after a drop of lamp oil. The 4th required both hands and a strip of cloth around the screwdriver handle. Beneath the tray lay a cedar disc as broad as a dinner plate, set flush into the bench. A narrow groove circled its edge. The disc weighed too much when she tried to lift it by the groove. She stopped, remembering her father's warning about unknown pressure. She cleared the bench, slid 1 cooling plate under the near edge, and supported the far side with folded packing paper. Then she eased the ribbon clamp backward. Its base moved. The clamp was not bolted to the bench at all. Its rear jaw had been holding the cedar disc down. Cora released the screw 1/4 turn at a time. The iron creaked, then relaxed. When the pressure lifted completely, the cedar rose by itself perhaps 1/2 an inch, pushed from below by a compressed leather pad. The smell beneath it was dry and clean. Inside the cavity sat 4 parcels wrapped in waxed cloth. She carried them to the front room and placed them beside the stove, far from sparks. The first parcel contained a full set of brass dies, an open book, a sheaf of wheat, a lantern, and the intertwined letters L and W. Each die had been rubbed with oil before storage. The second held raw materials, sticks of red, blue, black, and ivory sealing wax, spools of silk ribbon, and small cakes of beeswax wrapped in tissue. The ribbons had kept their color where light had never reached them. The third parcel was heavier. Inside lay a steel ribbon knife, 2 melting spoons, a thermometer marked to 400 degrees, and a narrow press handle engraved Thomas E. Lane. Cora placed that tool apart from the others. Her thumb followed the letters once. The last parcel was a tin document box with a clasp gone green at the edges. She opened it slowly. Bank certificates lay beneath a layer of cotton, each folded inside a numbered envelope. A ledger occupied the bottom, its leather spine cracked but intact. On top rested a small paper packet containing coins and a medal suspended from a faded blue ribbon. Cora did not open the ledger. She counted the certificates first, reading every institution, date, and amount aloud, so a haste would not alter the sum. First, Federal Savings of Philadelphia, Merchants Trust, Pennsylvania Beneficial, 21 certificates in all, some carrying renewal slips and handwritten interest calculations. The total was $27,900. She counted it again. The coin packet held 11 silver dollars, 8 Barber half dollars, 14 Indian head cents, and 6 Liberty nickels, worn smooth at the buffalo's absent place. Beneath them lay a purple heart in its black case, engraved Elias Wren, 1918. Cora sat with her hands flat on the floorboards. The stove settled behind her. Outside, Amos barked once near Walter Pike's mailbox, and a freight train sounded beyond the marsh. She could have opened the ledger then. She could have read the first name, the first sum, the first proof that her father had not invented the past Denise denied. Instead, she wrapped the certificates again, placed the metal beside them, and returned the tin box to the cavity. She kept only the ledger outside, unopened, beneath the porcelain robin. Night had cleared the clouds. Cora walked behind the building to where the creek widened into black water and stood among the reeds. The cold entered her sleeves. Across the surface, the moon broke whenever the current touched a submerged branch, then formed again downstream. She watched until her breathing matched the water. Some promises wait longer than the people who made them. At first light, Cora carried the ledger to the pressing table and opened its cover with both hands. The first pages listed names, addresses, ribbon colors, and postage in a disciplined column. Halfway through, a folded letter rested between entries dated 34 years apart. She knew the handwriting before she touched it. The narrow capitals, the open lower loops, and the level crossbars belonged to the hand that had labeled every jar in her father's kitchen. My dear one, whoever you are, Dr. Miriam Feld at Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia has told me the cancer is in my pancreas and has traveled beyond what surgery can reach. She has been honest, and I ask that you honor her honesty by reading this without inventing a rescue for me. Our line in this work began with Adelaide Wren, born in 1846 near Lancaster, who came to Philadelphia in 1868 and pressed mourning ribbons for a printer on Chestnut Street. Her daughter, Ruth Wren Lane, opened this room with Josiah Lane in 1888. Ruth's daughter, Cora Lane, kept it through the influenza year of 1918, and after her brother Elias was lost in France during the Great War. Clara's son, Edward, taught my father, Samuel Lane, and Samuel taught me. I am Thomas Edward Lane, born in 1968, and I am writing, so the work does not vanish merely because one household chose silence. Lane and Wren Letter Services closed on November 3, 1966. After that date, the room stood unused for more than 30 years. The family argued over taxes, ownership, and old injuries, until speaking of the place became forbidden. Silence did what weather could not. It made the work seem imaginary. The certificates in the cavity were saved from fees paid by schools and charitable societies. They were meant to support the next careful keeper. The ledger records scholarship letters sent after layoffs at Baldwin, Diston, and the Navy Yard. We never opened the replies unless invited. A sealed letter belongs first to the person whose name is written upon it. For blue sealing wax, work near 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat slowly and turn the stick, or the resin will scorch before the beeswax softens. Lay ribbon beneath the fold at a ratio of 2 widths showing above to 1 below. Let the poured wax rest for 3 breaths before lowering the dye. Hold steady for 8 seconds, then cool the seal on iron, never stone, because stone draws heat too quickly and cracks the rim. Do not inherit the room as an ornament. Sweep it, repair it, use the tools. Work is the only proof that inheritance has passed into living hands. Keep enough money to preserve the roof, the chimney, and your own body. Leave something exact for the person who comes after you. Behind the building, near the creek, there is a granite marker beneath the walnut roots. Elias's name is there, though his body remained in France. Light the old spirit lamp once for him. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Thomas Edward, Lane, January 21, 2022. Cora read the letter twice. The second time, she did not stop at her father's name. She followed every sentence to the signature, then folded the paper along its original creases, pressing each line flat with a bone folder. The ledger remained open beneath her hand, holding hundreds of names her father had protected without ever claiming their gratitude. She went through the back door with a shovel borrowed from Walter Pike's shed. Near the creek, one walnut root had lifted a shelf of earth. Beneath wet leaves and 2 inches of soil, the shovel struck stone. The marker was smaller than a grave slab and had sunk at one corner. Cora cleared it with her fingers until the inscription emerged. Elias Wren 1893-1918 Argonie. Carved lantern appeared below the dates, the same emblem as one of the brass dies. Mud filled its narrow lines. She cleaned them with the edge of a twig and left the stone uncovered to the morning. Inside, she found the spirit lamp wrapped with the melting spoons. Its brass reservoir was dulled but sound. She trimmed the wick, added a little alcohol Samuel had included for cleaning metal, and set the lamp on the iron cooling plate. The flame rose blue at its base and nearly colorless above, no larger than a thumbnail. She did not speak over it. The small kindnesses returned to her through their objects. Mrs. Voss had repeated forbidden handwriting onto the deed. The librarian with the pencil in her bun had unfolded a map and called 11 miles walkable, rather than impossible. Samuel Kessler had written her name into a credit book and trusted an honest number. Walter Pike had left the shed unlocked, with the shovel leaning where she could see it. None of them had changed her life alone. Each had kept one door from closing before she reached it. Perhaps someone once gave you a kindness so small they may not remember it. A meal, a ride, a sentence spoken without judgment. What was it, and what did it allow you to do next? Tell us in the comments, if you can. Someone reading may need to know that modest mercies still travel. That night, Cora wrapped the dies, the ribbon knife, the thermometer, and her father's engraved press handle in clean cloth. She placed them beside her pallet, with the letter beneath the porcelain robin. The spirit lamp had cooled, but its faint mineral scent remained in the room until morning. The first snow came on December 2nd. 6 inches laid quietly over the walnut lane before dawn. Cora woke to a thin white line where the roof seam had sifted powder onto the floor. She opened repairs for the small holder to the roofing chapter and read it 3 times. Once beside the stove, once standing beneath the sagging beam, and once with a pencil marking every instruction. She could not afford to misunderstand. The main roof measured 24 by 16 feet along the slopes. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 14 squares of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 24 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Samuel checked her figures, crossed out 1 bundle, and placed an old roofing hatchet on the counter. "My brother carried this 30 years, he said. "It should work again." Walter Pike brought Lester Cobb, a retired roofer with a missing left ear and knees wrapped in wool. Lester studied the rafters, spat into the snow, and refused the $5 Cora offered. "Keep it for flashing," he said. They worked 11 days. A split-center rafter received a sister rafter bolted alongside it, each whole board before the carriage bolts were tightened. Lester snapped a chalk line across the felt and taught Cora to set every nail with 3 strokes, 1 to place it, 1 to drive it, 1 light tap to seat the head, without crushing the shingle. "That nail's proud." Cora reached for the hatchet. "Pull it." By the 5th day, her palms had opened beneath the gloves. By the 9th, wind lifted the loose felt faster than they could tack it, and the 3 of them lay across the roof until the gust passed. They finished on December 14th. The final ridge shingle settled beneath Lester's palm, while snowmelt ran cleanly into the ditch instead of through the ceiling. January exposed what soot had hidden. Several chimney bricks had spalled so deeply that their red faces powdered beneath Cora's thumb, and the mortar between the lower courses could be scraped out with a spoon. She removed only what had failed, numbering each sound brick in chalk before lowering it in a bucket. Samuel found hydraulic lime in a torn sack and sold it at cost. Cora mixed 3 parts sharp sand into 1 part lime for the outer joints, then used equal parts fire clay and lime for the inner throat, where heat would strike hardest. Water went in by handfuls. Too much made the mortar slump. Too little left it unable to bind. For 3 weeks she worked in temperatures that stayed in the 20s. Gloves dulled her touch, so she pointed the narrow joints barehanded, packing mortar with the edge of a bent table knife. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb. She warmed them against a jar of heated stones, flexed them until pain returned, and climbed again. One morning, a repaired course cracked because she had allowed the fire below to burn too strongly during the cure. She removed the entire section and began again. On January 28th, Lester stood outside while Cora lit the test fire. She fed it slowly, adding 1 split at a time. Smoke rose through the rebuilt throat, crossed no joint, and left the chimney in a straight gray column. Lester watched the top for a full minute. "That will draw," he said. It did. Beneath the dirt, the front room held white pine planks fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Cora set every proud nail below the surface with a square punch before Samuel rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day. The first pass, at 80 grit, removed the blackened finish and the shallow scars of chair legs. At 120, the grain began to close. The 220 grit left the board smooth enough to catch cloth without raising a splinter. She sanded along the edges by hand, careful not to round the old joints. When the dust settled, the floor was pale and almost raw-looking. She wiped it with mineral spirits, waited overnight, then rubbed in the first coat of oil with folded cotton. 2 more coats followed, each thin enough to penetrate, rather than skin over. After the final coat, she closed the room for a 48-hour cure. The color deepened from dark honey toward mahogany, where a century of feet had compressed the pine. There was one morning she did nothing. She woke with her hands swollen and the sight of the unfinished back room pressing against her like another demand. At the marsh, a great blue heron stood in water no deeper than its ankles. It waited without shifting while the creek carried twigs past its legs. Cora sat on the bank until afternoon. She did not open the manual, sharpen a tool, or apologize to the empty room. Near dusk, the heron lifted with 3 slow strokes and crossed the reeds. The next morning, she began the second oil coat. 8 windows remained. 3 had no glass at all. 4 were split by cracks that traveled from corner to corner, and 1 held an original pane dated by its wavering crown and tiny trapped bubbles to the building's first construction in 1788. Cora preserved that pane, removing its sash whole and laying it flat on folded blankets. She softened the old putty with a heated knife, then lifted it in narrow lengths so the wood beneath would not splinter. New panes were bedded in DAP 33, pressed gently until a thin line of putty showed inside. Glazing points went in every 8 inches. She rolled the finishing putty between her palms, laid it along the rabbet, and drew the knife at a single angle, so rain would have no shelf to rest upon. The sash cords had rotted to brown threads. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the counterweight eye. The first repaired sash dropped too quickly. She opened the pocket again, shortened the cord by 2 inches, and reset the weight. By the last window, February light had changed. It no longer faded at mid-afternoon, but remained on the sill while she tooled the final corner. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch. It tipped forward, black cap bright against the sky, and struck 1 shell with its beak. Cora held the glazing knife still until the bird flew. The plaster failed first beside the chimney, where heat and old damp had loosened it from the hand-split oak lath. Cora attempted 3 patches. The first sagged. The second cracked around the edge before sunrise. The third detached in 1 pale sheet and broke across the floor. Samuel brought her a burlap bag of horsehair that had belonged to his father. She washed it in warm water, teased apart the clumps, and mixed it into lime plaster until each handful held together without becoming fibrous. The scratch coat went on first, forced between the lath, and scored with a wooden comb. A 3/8-inch brown coat followed, leveled but left faintly rough, then cured for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finished coat was 1/8 inch, worked with a steel trowel until the wall reflected the window as a soft brightness rather than a shine. Cora rested her palm against the final patch. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Bell began leaving paper bags on the doorstep before sunrise. She had red spectacles suspended from a chain and always folded the top of each bag twice. Inside were biscuits, boiled eggs, or the end of a ham too small for the cafe counter. Cora carried the third bag back to the River Cafe with 2 coins in her palm. Doris closed Cora's fingers over them. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." She turned away before Cora could refuse and began wiping an already clean counter. Caleb arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 15, narrow as a fence rail, with a white scar through one eyebrow. Without introduction, he rolled an ash round upright and divided it with 2 clean blows. "I can pay you next month," Cora said. He shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather." He worked until the woodpile reached the lower edge of the rear window. When he left, he leaned the maul against the wall and pushed the bicycle uphill without asking whether he should return. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his way to the chapel. He wore a brown hat with a rain-darkened brim and carried no umbrella. For weeks he only tipped the hat. On the first morning in March, he stopped beside the walnut lane, looked at the repaired roof, and lifted one hand. "Keep these hands steady," he said. Then he continued toward town. Cora postponed the cellar until February 11th, partly because the hatch had swollen shut, and partly because the dark below seemed willing to remain untouched. She worked a putty knife around the frame, levered the boards apart, and lowered Samuel's lantern ahead of her. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot floor laid in fieldstone. The walls held winter cold like deep water. At the center stood a dressed granite slab, smoother than the surrounding stones, and carved with the open lantern mark used on the old brass die. Cora swept around it, but did not test its weight. Not every sealed thing required opening. Under the 3rd step, her brush caught on a small oak box wedged against the riser. Its lid had warped, though the brass hinges remained sound. Inside lay a key no longer than her smallest finger. The bow had been shaped into an open lantern, its flame cut through the center. Beneath it rested a tintype, wrapped in cloth. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the cottage in summer, holding a ribbon knife against her apron. Her hair was pinned high. Her mouth was serious. The resemblance was not exact, yet the angle of her eyes and the narrowness of her hands made Cora sit down on the stone step. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Cora Lane, daughter of Ruth Wren Lane, age 25, summer of 1903. Cora carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside the porcelain robin. She tried it in no lock. The snow retreated in ridges along the ditches. The creek grew loud with runoff, and pale walnut catkins appeared where the branches had seemed dead a week before. Cora cleaned the dies, but did not begin full commissions. The walls still held winter damp, and her hands needed to learn again without her father's voice correcting the pressure. She chose one worn Liberty nickel from the packet and spent its value on ribbon scraps, lamp alcohol, and a small block of practice wax. Each evening she made samples no larger than a postage stamp. Some seals clouded, some ribbons shifted under the die. A few cooled with clean, unbroken rims. She kept all of them. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 6, 2024, Cora completed the first object she allowed herself to call finished. It was a scholarship letter for a nursing assistant from Bridesburg whose factory shift had been cut in half. Cora heated blue wax to 170 degrees, laid ivory ribbon beneath the fold, waited 3 breaths, and lowered the open lantern die for 8 seconds. When she lifted it, the emblem stood clear, every edge intact. She placed the letter on the iron cooling plate and watched the wax lose its gloss. No one applauded. Snow touched the window and disappeared. The restored room had remained modest. The walnut counter was rubbed smooth, but still carried its coin marks. Ribbons hung by shade along one wall. The spirit lamp stood on the pressing table beside the thermometer. The bone folders and Thomas's engraved handle fitted to the repaired press. The floor shone darkly beneath 2 plain chairs Doris had found in a church storeroom. The brass key waited on the mantel until the following June. Caleb noticed the plate in the oldest walnut tree while cutting back poison ivy. It was a narrow brass oval set flush into the trunk, almost swallowed by bark. At its center was a lantern no larger than a thumbnail. Cora brought the key outside. The bow matched the carved emblem, and the stem entered with resistance from years of sap and weather. She turned it carefully. A section of the plate released. Behind it, protected inside a copper-lined hollow, lay a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. The first object was a folded 48-star flag, its blue field faded at the creases. The second was a note dated October 12, 1918, written by Cora Lane during the final weeks of the Great War. She wrote that Elias had been missing since the fighting near the Argonne, and that Ruth refused to close the pressing room, while soldiers' families still required notices, affidavits, and letters sent across the ocean. Clara had hidden the flag because her mother could not bear to see it folded for a funeral without a body. The final lines were brief. "If Elias does not return, let this cloth remain here until someone can carry his name without carrying our anger. We sealed letters for other mothers. We must leave one honest thing for our own." Cora refolded the note along its weakened lines. She did not hang the flag. She placed it in an archival box, purchased from the Historical Society, and kept the original oilcloth beneath it. On November 11, 2025, she carried the Purple Heart to Philadelphia National Cemetery. Elias had no grave there, but the cemetery superintendent permitted the medal to rest for the morning beside the memorial stone honoring soldiers whose bodies remained overseas. At 11 o'clock, Cora stood with Walter, Samuel, and Caleb, while a distant bugle sounded. Before leaving, she returned the medal to its case. The certificates were verified through a bank attorney Mrs. Voss trusted. Several required affidavits, and some had accumulated less interest than the handwritten slips predicted. Cora used 3 coins from the packet: the Liberty nickel for practice materials, 1 Barber $50 toward a new chimney cap, and 1 Indian head cent set beneath the threshold when the front door was rehung. The remaining coins went back into the tin box. She added a current bank statement, the deed, and a written account of every repair. Across the outer envelope she wrote, "For the next one." The box returned to the cedar cavity, and the ribbon clamp closed above it with only enough pressure to keep the disc seated. The shop reopened quietly. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard. Hand-pressed ribbon. Seals, formal letters, and certificates. Cora Lane, Millbrook Road. The first week brought 2 orders. One was for a retirement letter, the other was a certificate for a church organist. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in the original ledger's final pages. Cora accepted only the work she could complete without haste. Caleb returned in August, carrying a hand-carved sign across the handlebars of the same Schwinn, though his knees now rose too high for the frame. The board was black walnut, planed smooth, and lettered in gold. Lane and Wren ribbon. Pressing and daughters Cora ran one finger across the added words. There were no daughters in the old name, she said. Caleb leaned the bicycle against the wall. There were. They just were not painted. He had carved the letters slightly smaller than the rest, as though leaving room for later hands. Together they mounted the sign beneath the weathered original. The new board did not cover the rust. It hung below it. That autumn, Cora began a letter of her own. She used cream paper, blue ribbon, and the lantern dye. The first sentence came from her father's page, though everything after it belonged to her. My dear one, whoever you are. She wrote that the roof had been sistered, the chimney pointed in hydraulic lime, and the original pane preserved. She described where the cedar disc rested, how the clamp must be released, and why the granite slab in the cellar had not been lifted. She included the proper wax temperature and warned that hurried cooling cracked the rim. Then she wrote that ownership was not proof of belonging. Belonging began with sweeping, mending, and leaving the tool clean for another hand. The letter remained unfinished on the pressing table through winter. Cora added to it only when the work taught her something worth keeping. Some promises wait longer than the people who made them. One April evening, she opened the rear door and listened to the creek moving beyond the walnut roots. The brass key rested beside the porcelain robin. A newly sealed scholarship letter cooled under its exact weight of iron. The wax seal ribbon pressing room waits. It has always waited. At the county office, Mrs. Voss eventually retired. Her replacement found one of Cora's original dollar bills in the back of the center drawer, flattened beneath Thomas Lane's browned property card. Mrs. Voss had written no note explaining why she kept it. The bill remains there still.